The Indian automotive sector has been facing serious headwinds for the past couple of years. First, it was the jump from BS4 to BS6, and now with the COVID pandemic, we have seen zero sales figures in April. Welcome to Business World. I'm your host Siddharth, and on today's episode of BW Hotwires, my colleague Avishek and I are going to talk to Mr. Rajeev Singh, Partner Automotive, Deloitte India. Mr. Singh is going to share with us key insights from the industry and also talk about the way forward. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Sid.
Okay, sir, let's start this conversation with the auto industry, which is really struggling for the past couple of years. The pandemic has been a disruptor. What are your thoughts on the current situation?
So, Sid, I would say that this is an industry which has shown true character in really the toughest times. This was an industry which really went through a lot of challenging times in the pre-COVID scenario, as you rightly said. So, starting from probably the demonetization impact on this industry, followed by GST, the impact of GST on this industry. Then the industry also saw a lot of pressure because of BS6 norms that had to be followed. We had the axle load reforms that the company, the CV industry had to follow. So there were a lot of challenges, I would say, that were thrown at the industry, and the industry did pretty well. And then last, which came, was in the form of COVID. So what we believe is that the industry so far has done very well. I think the first and foremost thing that you see the industry has done is taking care of their people, prima facie. So we didn't see any of the players really trying to manufacture something or sell something in a tough market. When the situation was tough, I think the industry ensured that they put everything to a stop. We also saw the industry now opening up, but opening up very, very cautiously. So we find most of the players, whether they are the OEMs, the tier ones, the dealers, the finance, captive finance companies and so on, everyone is taking a very, very cautious approach, taking care towards people, care of infrastructure and so on and so forth. But what we also find at the same time is that all the players do also recognize that the new normal is going to be very different from the business that was there in the pre-COVID times. And a lot of players are trying to prepare themselves for this new normal. They are trying to digitize themselves at an accelerated pace. They are trying to see how can they service their customers with minimum amount of touch points. So they, I think, are taking all the right steps in terms of what one needs to do in the post-COVID situation, Siddharth.
Right, sir. Now you spoke about digitization. Now digital sales and the new word physical plus digital.
Phygital.
Yes, phygital. Sir, do you think this is the only way forward?
No. So I think that's not the only way forward, but there are many more things that the companies need to do. But one of the things that the companies are trying to drive a theme on is they are trying to see how do I ensure that I do my business with minimum contact with people. And this minimum contact with people is not just at the front end, which is where the consumers say walk at the dealer's end, but this is also their own sales staff, which is used to going to a particular geography and so on and so forth. This is also to do with their suppliers who come to the plant on a regular basis. This is also to do with a lot of support functions which go into the factory, whether they are from finance, logistics, HR, and so on and so forth. So this is something to do with cutting across the entire value chain, where the organizations are trying to say that can I minimize the work that we do, which is in person? Can I ensure that I move more towards virtualization, which is can I do all the things that I was doing earlier in person, but can I do them now virtually? So I would say that while digitization is a subset somewhere, but the bigger theme that people are trying to drive is virtualization of their organization. Can they become a virtual entity? And we are also finding that people are also discovering a lot of new ways of doing this. So people are finding that since it's a virtual world, you can get your subject matter expert earlier because of your own perception. You thought that you can't fly in someone from north into south, say if there is a vehicle failure problem. But now they realize that, okay, even without the person flying in, using some video analytics tools and so on and so forth, I can solve the problem at a shorter span of time. So I think people are also doing a lot of innovation at the same time. One of the other things that I find people also doing is that they recognize that this is the time when the health and financial concerns are probably at the highest levels. So while health concerns are getting answered by saying, how do I ensure that I operate more virtually? But financial concerns are also some of the OEMs are similarly working upon, where they are trying to see, can I increase the affordability of my vehicles by coming out with innovative schemes. So I would say that it's not just digitization that companies are doing, they're trying to take many steps in these tough times.
So, do you foresee a decline of interest in electric vehicle segment from manufacturers and customers in the next year or two, because of low cash or because of reduced consumer sentiment? Your thoughts?
So in fact, I think that this is probably the best time for, in fact, some of the tier one companies, if they are looking at EV. The reason is because overall, yes, I do believe that there is a little pushback, say, from the electrification of powertrain by a year or 2 years. But let's realize or understand that even if the crude oil prices may have gone down to say $30, $40 a barrel, and so on and so forth, the oil prices at which the consumer buys doesn't it has in fact gone up. It has not gone down. So from an economics perspective, the break-even point which was there for a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler still remains at the same point that it was there in the pre-COVID situation. So that is one fact that we should keep in mind. But nonetheless, even after that, there is definitely a little kind of a setback or a pushback, I would say, rather than setback, pushback is the better word, I would say, by 1 or 2 years. But this is also the time when the valuation of some of the players who were operating in the EV segment, especially the startup companies who were there in probably the charging infrastructure, or startup companies who were there in terms of providing last mile connectivity and so on and so forth. So the valuation of these companies may have got a little more attractive for probably the tier one players, the OEMs, and so on and so forth. And that's the reason why we find that the entire market around mergers and acquisition has suddenly become more active on the EV side. So I would say that there is always a silver lining. While I know that there is a pushback, say, by 1 or 2 years, but there is a silver lining where you're finding that a lot of players have become suddenly very active in this space at the same time, Abhishek. So that's the reason why I feel that this is not a market, or this is not a space which will kind of go away. The future is very, very clear that we are going to have an alternate to ICEE. It's only a question of a little more time, but the valuation in this 2 or 3 years could be very, very attractive for people to get in.
Okay. So, as you know, the current government reinforced its Make in India initiative by coming out with Atmanirbhar policy. At the same time, there is a lot of backlash against Chinese products and all. So, what are the takeaways of these two key developments?
See, let's try and understand that what is the dependency of automotive industry on the China market firstly. From an OEM perspective, we have a few OEMs probably who are dependent directly on China, not just the companies who have come from, say, originated from China, but also some of the large MNC players who may have a procurement footprint into China, and some of the parts they buy from China which comes into their India manufacturing plants. So that is one thing which is getting impacted, and some of these players are looking at probably alternate sourcing. So in the short term, if they find that they are not able to source some of the parts from China, since these are global supply chains, they are also looking at alternate sourcing from some other suppliers in some other parts of the geography. But the dependency really for us is higher from a tier one manufacturing perspective. So if you look at the total auto component in industry in India, about 27% of the total consumption that we have of auto components is actually getting imported, and of that a larger portion is actually coming from China. When I say a larger portion, I mean almost 60% of that total imports is coming from China. Now in a short term, it is not easy for any of these tier one players to set up manufacturing plants in India necessarily, but I think that from a long term perspective, most of the players are going to look at, whenever they look at capacity expansion, they're going to look at a China number two or a next to China as an option. So they are going to look at what is the next best alternate to China. Now, whether it will benefit us as India, I think that is a question mark still in our minds. At this point in time, it does appear that Vietnam seems to have their hand a little ahead of China. So whenever people are looking at an alternate to China, we find a larger number of them may be looking at Vietnam rather than India. But if we can get our act right, and if we can get some of the things probably more in favor of some of these business players who are looking at an alternate solution. That is where I think we will really be able to push the Make in India button a little more than what we are seeing today.
Sir, from a policy point of view, what do you think we need to do to get the whole Make in India traction going?
Yeah, so Sid, there are a lot of things. I think that first and foremost is that, see, we saw a Make in India campaign about 5 years back. Now that campaign, I think, has served the purpose. It did help in terms of improving our ranking in ease of doing business. It did help in terms of attracting a lot of foreign investments and so on. I think first and foremost that is required is that we need to get a sharper focus. Rather than having those 25 sectors on which we focused on Make in India campaign 1, I think in a Make in India 2.0, we should try and focus only on the top 8 or 10 sectors, not more than 8 or 10 sectors. So let's not go around looking at all sectors, but just try and focus on a few but high priority sectors. The second thing is there is still a lot of concern that business people or business entities which get into India have. They say that, see, unlike China where there is a single party, they say that it's a very easy clearance policy for them. And in India, when they come, they say that, okay, we have to first deal with the central government when you get into India. Then you have to deal with the state government because there are some subjects which are with the state government. Then you have to deal with the local authorities and so on. So while we may say that we have done a lot of work, and that is really actually also factually also correct, that a lot of work may have happened, but I think we still have a lot more to do in terms of ensuring that the ease of doing business in India really gets a further push. The third thing is that while we addressed tax and we ensured that the indirect tax reforms were undertaken in the country, but the two other reforms which are still pending at different places are something to do with the land reforms, which is still a hurdle for most of the business players who are looking at India as a destination. And the second is labor reforms. So I think that we also need to get our act around the two other reforms which have been pending for quite some time. Till we don't get our act completely right on some of these things, we may find that a lot of people will always have. The good news is, after Make in India campaign 1, India is definitely there in the boardrooms whenever the decision is taken. But how often do we get converted from being in the decision set to as the place of number one preference? That can go up only when we address some of these issues, I think. So those are some of the things that we need to address going ahead.
So you mentioned indirect tax, IDT. So
Yes.
now, sir, GST and automotive sector is amongst the highest.
Yeah.
It's almost as bad as cigarettes. So now, do you think the government should take any steps to reduce the GST to increase the demand? As it is, consumer sentiment is very low. People and purchasing a car or a bike or any automobile is a big ticket experience for a consumer. So as of now, do you think we should, the government should look at reducing the GST?
So, Sid, it's a tough question, and I know that this has been a demand by a lot of players, including the industry body, that we should look at GST reduction. And I would say that it could have been a good thing to do at other times, but post-COVID, I think there are many other things that one may have to do to generate demand rather than looking at a GST cut. Because we, at least I personally believe that by reducing the prices at this point in time, by reducing the taxes, we are not going to, the elasticity between price and demand in short is not something that is going to really favor the demand to go up by cutting down the taxes at this point in time. Also, let's realize that from a government perspective, 32% of the total GST which is collected comes from automotive alone. Now, one can always say that, see, when we are not selling, what is the GST that you are collecting and so on and so forth. But the government will play very high on the mind of the government to say that, see, 32%, 1/3 of my GST roughly comes only from one sector, which is automotive. And if I reduce the GST here, then how will it impact my total tax collections, especially when the manufacturing sector is on the lower side. So I think rather than trying to go back to the government and again posting a demand to say that I need a GST cut or a scrappage policy, I think we need to be a little more innovative in terms of demand generation. So that is what my view is, Siddharth.
So, I mean, can India be a global manufacturing hub for these big giants? If yes, what should be done to accelerate exports, because exports accounts for only 10 to 15% of the overall output, and that also by Hyundai, Maruti, and a handful of other companies.
See, I think that when you're looking at it, I'm not really looking at India becoming the largest manufacturing center from an automotive perspective, but there are many more things that I think India should look at trying to do. One of the things that we should try and avoid is trying to replicate the entire China model into the country, because we may have our own set of challenges, and it may not necessarily work from a perspective of India. But there are many more opportunities that we can tap into. We have a very, very deep technology skill, I would say. And by technology, I don't mean necessarily technology of casting or forging, but technology I meant is IT technology that we have. Going ahead, we believe that all these cars will have a lot of technology capabilities. And that is where, if we can see the convergence of the two sectors, which is that can we bring our technology knowledge along with the product knowledge and ensure we play the role in the new upcoming models, which are likely to be more heavy on technology and electrical and electronics. I think that is the space that India should eye for. While we do so, rather than being one of the mass manufacturers, we should try and see how we can manufacture small batches which are more customized and which are more personalized. So rather than trying to get into a domain which is large volumes and low margins, India should try and get into more customized, more personalized vehicles which will have a higher margin. So I think that is the niche space that we should be trying to aim for, Avishek.
So now I wanted to talk about the demand. Now there is a lack of demand in the industry. We are also seeing a very low consumer sentiment because of the uncertainties around. So after talking to a lot of people in the industry, we have got an answer about scrappage policy, maybe reduction in GST. What are the other ways that we and the industry can generate demand?
Yeah, so Sid, I think that there are quite a few things that the government and the industry body should collectively kind of think of generating demands, and let's look at each sector separately. Okay, so for example, if I look at commercial vehicle as a sector, I know that maybe reducing the GST, coming out with a scrappage policy may or may not be all that easy at this point in time. But what stops us from ensuring that we have a very robust and a disciplined method to ensure that not a single commercial vehicle player or a commercial vehicle in the country will overload itself? Now today, by an estimate, a rough estimate, we believe that about 15% of the total load which is carried from point A to point B are overloaded trucks. Now, if we ensure that we have more number of Wayman bridges on the highways, if we ensure that we become more disciplined in terms of the law that we have, and just enforce this law more strictly, it will automatically ensure that instead of 15% overloading, can we bring it down to 5% overloading or 0% overloading. Now, if we can do that, then we know that we will automatically generate a demand for an additional 10% or 15% vehicles in the market. So it is not a rocket science in that sense. So rather than trying to try and see can we have a major scrappage policy in the country, this is one idea. Now similarly, since you spoke about scrappage policy, let's think about another idea. A lot of vehicles are consumed by the government themselves. Today, maybe that for a private player, generating demand for trucks or generating demand for passenger vehicles could be a challenging ask, given that there are a lot of financial concerns. But at this point in time, is it possible for the government to step up and to ensure that government comes out with a mandate that no government offices, no PSUs in the country will use any vehicle which is older than Bharat Stage 2? And give a time frame of 18 months, give a time frame of 2 years, and so on and so forth. The total car park and the total truck which is used by government, including defense, for the movement of their own people, the movement of their own goods, and so on and so forth, is significantly high. Now, if you say that over the next 2 years, all the vehicles which are used by the government are going to be Bharat Stage 2 or later than that, automatically it will generate a decent amount of demand for new vehicles. And this is not going to be all that difficult because it's all about government spending. And typically, whenever we see a business a cycle going through a recession and so on and so forth, we have more than often seen that when the government starts to spend, it does trigger a cycle. And I would not be surprised that if the government tries to talk about all this and says that let's try and reduce the usage of all these vehicles because it also has a health implication. If the government ensures that we are not using any vehicle which is older than BS2, we are ensuring that as a government, we are ensuring that even the pollution levels that we are generating are under control or going down significantly. So there are multiple advantages of that. So like that, I think that there are a lot of ideas that probably the industry bodies along with the government can come and say that we don't have to necessarily think of big ticket ideas like a scrappage policy or GST, but even small ideas can help in generating the demand back in the industry.